Izzy in the Moonlit Garden, Chapter 1, The Midnight Unicorn. As far as she was concerned, Izzy Moonbow was certain that she hadn't seen the midnight blue alicorn before. She was sure of this, as sure as a little filly could be. For very few of her fellow unicorns, children and grown-ups both, would stray far enough to come across her cottage. Her people hardly paid one another any more attention than they thought necessary, which was to say, none at all. What is a stranger indeed if not another face lost to memories? But there, Izzy saw her, as she looked out onto the world from her bedroom window. Tall, dark, and blue, wrapped in a patchwork gray cloak, lurking amongst the tree line. Nothing, save for her height, made her stand out in particular. And for fleeting moments, Izzy wondered why she even bothered giving the mare any special attention. That was, of course, until she saw dust fall from the mare's cloak. Shimmering, glowing dust.
How strange.
Only her mother had such large amounts of glitter, and this mare certainly hadn't been to their cottage. Or perhaps she had, Izzy realized with a gasp, like a thief in the night. The thought faded when Izzy realized the mare's blue-green eyes were staring right back at her, from within the gnarled oak roots and bushes. She held her breath, and perhaps so did the mare too, for they stared at one another for what must have been an eternity. Then it passed, and the mare turned away, disappearing amidst the tree line with nary a sound. Only a trace of shimmering dust remained where she stood, glinting in the light. Izzy furrowed her brow. The forest was no place for little fillies, her father had told her once. After which her mother had chimed in, pointing out that they lived in a forest, and so Izzy forgot what they had spoken about afterwards.
Grown-ups are confusing.
But that didn't matter now. All Izzy knew then was that she ought to ask the mare where she had gotten so much glitter.
Mom!
Cried Izzy, hurrying downstairs with the pitter-patter of her tiny hooves.
I'm gonna play outside.
All right, dear,
her mother said, without raising her head from her latest painting, a rolling green field of grass upon a hillside.
Come home before dinner.
Okay.
Izzy's mother said nothing more, but that was okay. She was a busy mare, as busy as only artists could be. If the mare had taken her mother's glitter, then all the better for her to save the day. Without awaiting another reply, Izzy pushed the door open. Standing at the doorway, the little filly gazed upon the world outside of her family's cottage in full. Izzy didn't much like to play outside. It wasn't that it was terrifying. As a matter of fact, Bridlewood looked quite lovely at this time of day. With the sun at its highest, its lights reflected upon the many crystals that dotted the landscape. But no, it was how quiet the other children were. She couldn't understand why, not entirely, when there was so much to see out here. And Izzy found that she didn't like the children's silence. Shaking her thoughts free of forlorn fillies and downtrodden colts, Izzy looked around. Her family's cottage was one of those furthest from the Crystal Tea Room, tucked away at the very edge of the village. Surely if the mare had shied away from a quick glimpse that she'd given her, she wouldn't head towards where others lived. There she saw it, shimmering upon the leaves. The glitter, and the mare, as he thought triumphantly, had left a trail. So, on this sunny afternoon, off Izzy went into the deeper forest amidst glittering golden dust. Bridlewood was a quiet forest. Large and a little foreboding too, with its towering oak trees and thick undergrowth, but quiet. Small wonder that their foremothers had chosen to settle here. Izzy beamed as she continued her trot down the gravel path. She knew that she remembered her mother's lessons well. Stories of how the first unicorn settlers on a pilgrimage for so long had at last found home in the enchanting sanctuary that they would later name Bridlewood. Yet beneath the beauty of the forest that she called home, Izzy felt alone. And never did she feel so keenly alone as now. Perhaps she had ventured too far, past winding creeks and moss-covered stones, the sun's rays disappearing one by one. The crystal that grew all around Bridlewood was nowhere to be seen. Here, even the sound of chirping birds and the rustling leaves had faded into the afternoon air. She must have walked for quite some time indeed, feeling some wetness in her eyes, with branches all around her growing thicker and thicker still. Her mother would be worried sick. Her father? Oh, she could just picture him calling out to her. But Izzy knew that even if she could yell, he would never hear her, so far was he. Just as she stopped and panted, eyes darting around the thick woods, she saw it. A small possum sitting upon a tiny stump. White and gray, like all possums were. It looked at her with curious little eyes. But before she could say anything, it had hopped and scurried off into the nearby bush. When Izzy went through, she saw the golden glowing trail yet again, the possum sniffing at it. Here, they stood in a tunnel of leaves and twisting branches, illuminated by the trail that lay ahead.
Thank you.
Izzy exclaimed happily, to which the possum squeaked back. So she went, further through the tunnel. Izzy knew not how long she'd walked, so certain that she was not alone, not with a possum accompanying her, until at last she came across a grove through a curtain of vines. A garden was as best as she could describe it. Izzy hadn't seen a garden this well kept. Flowers of many colors, not all of which she could name, lined its edges with vines climbing up the trees. Above, the sun's rays still shone through, basking it in a warm light. A creek split the little garden, ending in a tiny spring.
How very odd.
Izzy didn't know of any pony who'd venture this far into Bridlewood's deepest, darkest corners. Yet here she saw plainly a brass spyglass lying against the tree, rolled up scrolls that looked yellow with age, and 3 flat stones arranged like a small table for 2.
Do you live here?
Izzy asked the possum. And the possum looked up to her, staring at her with those tiny eyes. Then it scurried off up the nearest tree and into the hollow up above.
Comfy.
Izzy mused, but she couldn't dwell long on how the little critter had built all of this, for her eyes were drawn towards the color purple. A lot of it, in fact, tucked away beneath overhanging leaves. Only when she approached did she realize that they were, in fact, more flowers. Purple flowers of many little buds growing tall from their shrub-like foliage in pots. Izzy drew a whiff of its scent, feeling a sleepy calm wash over her. It was when she reached over to touch it that a reverberating voice sounded from around her.
Halt!
It exclaimed.
That is not for thine hooves.
Izzy pulled her hoof back just as the other pony in the little garden pushed leaves aside and emerged from the undergrowth. The unicorn was indeed tall. Shrouded in the patchwork gray cloak, she stood taller still than Izzy had thought. Taller than any pony she'd ever seen. Even tall, mean Alphabeetle wouldn't reach the tip of her horn. Izzy's eyes continued to pan up until they met the unicorn's own pair. These were blue-green, the color of water in a forest pond.
She's pretty.
Her coat reminded Izzy of cloudless skies when the stars shone the brightest, and Izzy could just see the faintest hint of a light azure mane from beneath her hood, a shade which reminded her of her mother's paintings of lovely noontime gatherings. Her mother was dotted with youthful dark freckles. She couldn't have been much older than her mother.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Said Izzy.
Your flowers are very pretty.
The mare inclined her head ever so slightly, but her gaze remained firm and narrowed.
Leave us, child,
said the mare.
'Tis no place for you, nor your ilk.
Izzy blinked twice. The mare's voice was unlike anything that she'd heard before. She sounded weary, yet where Izzy's neighbors and fellow children sounded deadpan and withdrawn, there was a mellifluous, silky tone to her voice. Mellifluous. That was a nice word. Her mother liked to use fancy words, but that was another matter for another time. The mare's eyes were still narrowed, her brows furrowed.
Did you not hear?
She said, her voice rising.
Leave us.
The wind blew past, and from beneath the mare's cloak, Izzy glimpsed what could have only been glitter. Sparkling, shimmering glitter.
Where did you get those?
The mare blinked.
I beg your pardon?
The glitter!
Izzy exclaimed, pointing at her cloak.
Where did you get that? Did you take it from Mom? Did you ask her? She uses glitter a lot, so if she's missing some, she'll be sadder than usual. Dad usually gets her some, but he doesn't do it anymore.
The mare blinked again once, then twice. Then, with a flourish, she stretched a forehoof from beneath her patchwork cloak, scattering tiny, sparkling golden dust all around.
This is not glitter, for goodness sake.
The mare answered with a huff.
Nay, this is stardust. I marvel that you could spot it at all.
Oh, I don't know what that is.
Then come back sometime and perhaps I'll tell you.
Can't you tell me now?
Don't you have a family to return to?
The mare countered before glancing up.
The night shall be falling soon, and these woods are hardly some place a filly should be in by herself.
She pointed towards the tunnel.
Follow the trail, and little Tiberius shall guide thee.
Well, okay.
Izzy said, looking down at her hooves.
Dad always said I shouldn't be out in the forest all by myself, but, you shouldn't be either.
After a moment's silence, she cleared her throat.
I see,
said the mare.
Then I shall attempt to keep myself safe.
Izzy looked up, beaming.
Okay,
She said.
bye, Miss Bell Unicorn. I'll see you tomorrow.
She waved, and turned away without another hesitation, humming a jaunty tune to herself as she followed the possum. But as she was to leave through the hanging vines, she looked back at the mare. The mystery mare stood there, motionless, her head tilted off to one side. Classic Luna. Seems like she went back to her mysterious ways. But then again, that might be one of the charming things about her. Anyways, let's get on to our golden donators. Top donators are 630, J10 Man, Darkside, Only One Thing, and Ceru Orion. Rayden, Narwhals, Blackmoonheart, Pastel Skies, Austin Rolan, Stu Hex, Sword Brother and Mordred, Omicron Lyrae, Will, Chris, Twinkie, Zaza, Riot Soul, Iron Sky, Badass Waffle, Shadow Moon, Luigi88, and many more awesome people. Thank you all so much for watching this video and live life to the fullest.